So when I was about your age, actually, there was a TV show that I used to watch. It was called Small Wonder. And it was a TV show about a family that had a little girl, and that little girl was not human. She was a robot, and her name was Vicky. And I always wanted to build my own Vicky.
So today I have Nisha joining me for the Innovator series, and just to have her talk a little bit about some of the things that she's doing, some advice that she has for Wequal members, and well, just anything else. And so the first question is, tell us about yourself. What is your passion?
Sure. Yeah, my name is Nisha. It's lovely to meet you all. My passion, I've always been really an engineer at heart and a teacher at heart. So, I studied computer science as part of my degree. I've been a practicing software engineer for a long time. And now I teach kids artificial intelligence. I actually started teaching kids when I was in college and I taught math back then. So I've gone from teaching math, and so those two things have always been my passion: technology and teaching.
Awesome. What got you into artificial intelligence? Because I know that that's one thing that you've been getting more into is like teaching kids about AI. So what got you interested in that, and what got you interested in teaching?
Absolutely. So two things. Yeah, I think we'll start with AI and then we'll go to the teaching. So when I was about your age, actually, there was a TV show that I used to watch. It was called Small Wonder. And it was a TV show about a family that had a little girl, and that little girl was not human. She was a robot, and her name was Vicky. And everybody, around her, except for her family, thought she was a real person. So that was what the TV show was about. And I thought that was super cool. And I always wanted to build my own Vicky. So that's how I got first interested in artificial intelligence. And then I played with it, around with it a bit when I was in graduate school and stuff like that. And I did a lot of other kinds of software, but about 7 years ago I decided to really go into artificial intelligence full time. That's how kind of I ended up here. Now, in terms of what got me interested in teaching, so my parents are both teachers, actually. So my mom is a physics teacher and my dad is a math teacher. And a lot of the things that I learned before I went to college, I actually learned from them. They used to teach me at home, and I learned math from my dad and stuff like that. And so teaching was always sort of part of our family. And the idea of being a teacher was something that was very natural to me.
Awesome. And I see you have something in the corner that says AI Club. What is that? Do you want to tell us a little bit?
Sure. So AI Club is actually the organization that I founded to teach AI primarily to K through 12 students. We teach AI to lots of different kinds of people, but our real focus is in K through 12 students. So, we basically help them learn artificial intelligence, different kinds of technology, like, how to do programming, how to build apps with AI, how to solve problems, apply them for social good and stuff like that. And so that's what AI Club is.
Yeah, that's also one thing we want to have Wequal School students maybe like join your platform, because one of the things the founder of Coursera was talking about is like most of the jobs in the future are going to be related to data in some way, shape, or form, and that's very much related to artificial intelligence, and just thinking about like preparing yourself for that economy where that's really an integral part of a lot of the jobs. So
Absolutely. I think we're going through sort of, if you look at kind of the history of the world, right, there have been several major transitions. If you look even further back, I mean, like when people really invented large scale transportation, it changed the way the world worked because finally now we could ship goods, things like that. The internet had a similar kind of revolution where now suddenly, like you and I are talking to each other, right? This was something that was not possible before the internet. And so the internet opened up a whole bunch of additional ways of people to just communicate live and in real time and kind of remove the notion of location for a large extent. The next really massive phase is information. So if you look at like now, how are people adding value? It's adding value through information and data. And the reason they're able to add value from information and data is because AI helps unlock sort of the it's kind of like a marketing-ish term, but the idea is there's cool stuff hidden in the data. And it's kind of hard to get it out, and the AI helps us get it out and make it useful. So that's one of the reasons why AI is so powerful, is because data is so powerful.
Yeah, and that's one thing you see in a lot of companies with their products based off of artificial intelligence is the ones with more data, those are the companies that are going to win. And
Exactly.
yeah.
Totally agree with you. That's a very astute observation. Yes.
What is your story?
My story. That's interesting. So, I mean, I guess a little bit about me. So I'm originally from Sri Lanka. I actually, moved to Africa when I was about 7 years old. And my parents, because they were teachers, they got teaching jobs in Africa, and they went to Africa, and that's actually where I, learned, basically a lot of different things I learned from my parents. When I came to the United States when I was about 14 years old, and I joined college, and I joined college very young. And so I, because of that, I've also been teaching for a very long time, because I started teaching other kids when I was very young. And so I've lived in the United States since I was about 14. I studied computer science. I live in California now. I moved out to California to go to grad school. I met my husband here. We have a 13-year-old daughter. She just turned 13 like a week and a half ago. So we have a brand new teenager in the house. And so that's mostly it. I've always loved technology. I've always been a bit of a techie. I may have studied math if I had decided not to go into engineering. Probably would have gone into math. But I think that now that I'm older, I think I made the right choice in going into engineering, because when I was young, I wasn't much of a people person. I liked math because math didn't have any opinions. Math was either right or wrong, right? And you didn't have to argue with people when it came to math. But at the same time, in real life, you have to work with people. And I like working with people now. So I'm kind of glad that I went into a job like this, where I can do technology stuff, but also learn and work a lot with different kinds of people. So
Mm,
hopefully that's a good, bit of a feel of who I am.
yeah, one question regarding like teaching kids artificial intelligence is there any like basic skills that you teach to them first that is kind of needed in order to grasp just the concept and actually starting to apply artificial intelligence into things?
No, that's a really, really good question. And I think this is one of the things that has historically sort of made it difficult, not just for kids, but for adults, is artificial intelligence relies a lot on math, but that doesn't mean that you need to know a lot of math to understand how it works and how to use it. If you wanted to build a brand new one from scratch that was completely a new method, yes. But if you wanted to use methods that were already there, then you don't, have to know a lot of math. So the analogy that I try to tell people is that, if you look at cars right now, right? We all have a car somehow in our lives. Like we are either drive one or we're in one. But how many of us can really describe how the car engine actually works? I for one can't, but I don't need to. I get everything I need done with a car. I know how to buy one. I know how to get one repaired. I know how to take it places. I know how to get myself a license and all of that. But that wasn't true in the early days of cars. In the early days of cars, people who drove the car actually had to know how to regulate the air fuel mixture. They had to know exactly how many times, the spark plugs fired and stuff like that, because otherwise the car would just stop running. So AI is sort of reaching this area where earlier people who worked with AI really had to know a lot of the internals. Now we've reached a point where, because of the way that AI is using information, everybody's going to need to work with AI. It's just kind of a fact. But that doesn't mean you have to know the crazy amount of math that goes in. Now I'm a math fan. I like math, and so math is fun. And so if you ever decide to learn the math, I would say totally go for it. Learn the math, but you don't necessarily need to. So bringing that back to your original question, which is, how do we teach kids AI? We usually start with concepts that, depending on the age of the student. So if it's an elementary school kid, concepts like AIs need to learn. How do they learn? They learn from teachers. Teachers give them information, and so kids teach their own AIs, and they quiz it and find out what it's doing right and wrong. They help it improve by correcting it when it does something wrong. And so they learn that process of how these AIs learn. And you don't need a lot of math. You just need the same kind of common sense you have at that age. If you're older like yourself and you have done a little bit of things like you understand what an average is and what percentages are and stuff like that, then you can learn to measure an AI. Once you go into high school and maybe you've done a little bit of algebra and stuff like that, then you can learn a little bit more. So what we do is that we match the concepts to the level of math and coding that kids know naturally. And turns out that there's a lot of concepts you can absorb at a very young age, particularly if you can build them and interact with them. And so that's the approach that we take.
Yeah, I think that is really important, because when you're thinking about just understanding the concept of AI, and then from there, then you can start to apply it in aspects of your life and see how perhaps in the future AI could be applied, and how some things may start to be automated. And then you can start to get a sense of like, what are the things that are actually going to be needed in an economy where everything that can be automated is being automated, and then what's left, because that's kind of important when you're thinking about getting a job in the future. And so,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's a really good point. And I think this is something that, I think scares a lot of people. But, and to be fair, I think, I don't think you should all be very, very, always very super optimistic about everything. I think it's good to be a little scared and ask hard questions. But one thing, if you think about technology, is like, every time that technology has come along and automated something, it has indirectly increased the number of jobs. Like, for example, I mean, I lived in a, I've lived, and worked where before there were phones, before there were GPSs, right? And yes, we got along fine, but we spent a bunch of time doing things that we don't have to do anymore. So I have now more free time to do other things. And so there's always more things to do. The problem is finding them. And the other problem is that if you don't help people find them, then they get stuck. And the stuck people, unfortunately, will suffer. And so it's important that as technology shows up and certain things get automated, that you help humans find the other things that need to be done and help train them so that they can do those other things. That way there'll be more jobs, but at the same time, people don't have this transitionary problem.
Yeah, that's also one thing with it's like, well, there's going to be a bunch of robots in the future, and then the jobs that emerge from that is programming the robots. And it's like, well, there's going to be a bunch of artificial intelligence algorithms, and then the jobs that come from that is like refining those algorithms and making them better and feeding it more data.
Exactly. So anytime something gets automated, some part of your life is getting easier, frees up your mind to focus on other things that you can do. Absolutely.
What makes you such a successful entrepreneur?
Well, I'd like to think I'm a successful entrepreneur, so thank you for that. What I would say generally is that, one of the things that I think makes entrepreneurship sort of different from, maybe like getting a job, as an engineer or a programmer, one thing that I'll maybe say two things. One that is really fun and one that's kind of hard. One that's really fun is that you get to see everything. So if you're just an engineer, and mind you, I've been an engineer for many years, being an engineer is wonderful and you can add a lot of value. If you are an engineer, then you have a particular job to do. And your job contributes to, solving a problem, but you don't often see the whole problem. Now, when you do that, however, the upside of doing, being something like an engineer is you can, really focus and you can solve a lot of problems very, very deeply, because there's a lot of support around you. So, that kind of job is by no means, not valuable. It's valuable because there are certain kinds of problems you can only solve that way. If you're an entrepreneur, you're solving a different kind of problem, but you're seeing it all. Like I talk to, people for sales. I talk to finance, I talk to engineering. I have to, it's basically a small ship and you have to keep the ship running. So it's a very different experience and that can be a lot of fun. And so what I typically advise people is find out what's right for you. I spent many years being an engineer and I think it's a wonderful thing. I just realized I enjoyed being an entrepreneur more. But I also know many people who just really enjoy being engineers and they're extraordinarily good engineers, and they'll add a lot of value in their companies. So that's one of the things. I think the second thing that I think is important about being an entrepreneur is really, understanding how to listen to your customers, like being able to identify who is going to use your product, what is it they're going to do with it, because it's a tremendously eye-opening experience to watch someone else use what you have built, if that makes sense. Because, and almost all the time, something happens that you don't ever see coming. Some of it is good, some of it is bad, but it's really, invigorating to do that. So those are the kinds of suggestions I would have. First, figure out if it's right for you, and if it is right for you, you know, think really hard about the customer, because you'll learn so much that way.
Yeah, that's also, I see so many parallels between some of the advice people give when starting companies and then just applying it to, you can almost kind of think of it as a very small scale company in a sense, because what you're trying to do when you start a business is just add value. And when students at Wequel School start creating projects, that's also what they're trying to do. Although there are differences, one of the things is know what types of problems that you want to solve, but it's also just learn about yourself and just how are you uniquely positioned to add value. That's one thing people want to think about when they're just creating projects and businesses. And then listening to your customers, listening to your readers if you wrote an article, and understanding how they perceived what you wrote, because it might make perfect sense to you and everyone else is all confused. So yeah.
No, there's absolutely. I think that there's definitely a parallel between, entrepreneurship in the professional world and kids starting businesses. And so, and even doing projects, one of the things you always want to think about is, okay, is the problem that I'm solving real? Why am I the right person to work on it? It could be anything from I just really care to I know something about it. And either or, any combination of those is okay. You can learn a lot of what you don't know. If you care about it, that's usually enough to get started. Then the next one is, how am I going to solve it? How have other people solved it? And why is my solution in some way better? Because if not, then why am I doing it, right? So if you ask yourself those questions, then you will, come up with a good solution to the problem. Asking yourself those questions is a very important thing. And that is the same thing that happens in entrepreneurship.
Yeah, I definitely agree. um do you see yourself as an innovator, and if so, why?
Again, I appreciate that you think I'm an innovator. So that, the only thing I would tell you is that I guess what I do like is, I have found that if I try to do something that I haven't done before, I almost always end up happier as a result. So I'm very, very easily bored. And so I really cannot spend a lot of my time doing again and again something I already know how to do, if that makes sense. I prefer to teach people that at that point. And I'm usually happiest when there's a problem and it's not clear to me how to solve it. And then sometime later I figure out how. So a lot of my career has been kind of driven by that. And so anything that I've created as a result has been because of that I'm sort of drawn to problems, and I enjoy that. And I feel good at the end of the day. I sleep well if I feel like, oh my God, that was really cool. Yeah. I didn't know how to do that, and now I do. So that's, I think, the spirit of sort of innovation, is finding a problem where solution is not obvious and then seeing what you can do. The other piece of advice I would give you is that the more you kind of read and the more you sort of learn about how other stuff works, it's kind of nice how dots sort of get connected over time. Like sometimes you find, ways that people have solved problems in an entirely different space, that you can apply. And so I'll give you an example. Like I worked with a student last year who used a particular approach in her project, which was to do early detection of Alzheimer's. And the approach had to do with tracking how things changed over time in the patient and things like that. And, and extracting out basically sort of that kind of information. And now I'm finding that in an entirely different project in sports, the same approach can be used. Has nothing to do with Alzheimer's, but the approach of watching how things change over time is something that we can apply. We can even probably apply the code. So that's the kind of stuff I mean about being able to connect dots.
Yeah, that's also one thing we were, when it's like learning, when you're learning about things and you're just learning about a bunch of different things when you're young and you haven't had the time to gather a lot of information and see how everything is interconnected. But then as you learn about all these different things in all these different areas, you're actually, your rate of learning starts to kind of go up. And you know how there's like a learning curve when
Yes.
you first start to learn something just specific, but then that actually becomes inverted when you're thinking about like just learning about things overall and just seeing how everything is interconnected, because once you have more dots, then you can see how they're actually related to each other. That's really interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this is, by the way, also a concept that we typically, I learned this in research in graduate school, but it's a concept that typically try to teach kids is part of it is also trying to figure out the essence of what you've learned. So if you, for example, read something, what are the top three things that you learn? Don't worry about the nitty gritty detail, like something in the corner of a page that they said that was important. What are the three key things that you learned from what you read? Because if you can figure out how to extract those, then over time you become really efficient at reading. And you can read something very quickly and say, okay, I know what the key point is. I may not remember all the details. I may not remember exactly what was on graph 5 on page, 12 or whatever, but I know what the point was. And if I find some place where I can apply that point, now I know how to do it. So if you, at the beginning, it'll be slow, it'll be painful, but if you develop yourself a little bit of a practice, then it becomes much, much easier to acquire new information in the future. And then those dots start to grow and then the connections start to grow as well.
Yeah, I think that's also very like related to learning the concept of artificial intelligence and not maybe all the details of the actual algorithms that might go into it. So,
Absolutely. Yeah. And so that's why we definitely take a top down approach that you get to build one pretty much on the first day. You talk to it, you learn a lot about it. And by the time you get to learning the math, you know what the math is for. Start
yeah.
understanding, oh, I understand a little bit more than I did, but it builds on itself. Yes. If you're going bottom up, by the time you learn the math, you're exhausted. I don't even want to talk to an AI. I've dealt with so much math. So yeah, absolutely.
What are the skills you wish you learned when you were young?
Ooh, that's a really good question. So, when I was young, I was, kind of, and all my friends were like that too, is we were in schools that were very academically focused, and we really, we studied, we had tests. Our job was to get good scores on the test. Now, I think, particularly kids in this country and kids like yourselves have many opportunities to also learn how to build teams, how to work together, how to present, how to organize your ideas, how to take initiatives, start businesses, build your own projects, solve problems, because both of those skills are needed in the real world. You need to have your, basic fundamentals solid. Otherwise, it'll be hard for you to build things that work. But at the same time, doing anything, impactful in the real world requires that you typically work with people, you advocate for your ideas, you kind of learn the latest technology and learn how to apply it and where to apply it. So I think that's what I would say, suggest that, that I would say that I didn't really have that because that wasn't the way we were taught at, but I think that like my daughter, for example, has that, and I definitely encourage her to focus on applying technology to solve problems and being able to communicate her ideas as well.
Yeah, yeah. That's also just that's one thing that we really want to emphasize is like learning those, some people call them soft skills, but it's like it's just ways that you can just understanding all of the things that are going to be needed in the fundamental skills like math, reading, writing, like those are very important and fundamental, and being able to do all of these things, but then actually working with people, that's something that I think it's often overlooked.
No, no, I
uh
think it's very important. So it's good that you're, also thinking that way. Yeah, absolutely.
what is some advice you would like to give to students and members at We Cool School wanting to start their own business?
Wanting to start your own business. No, I think that the business, the process of starting your own business is very much an entrepreneurial activity, regardless of your age. And then I would say, ask yourself sort of the following kind of questions, which is, what is the problem I'm trying to solve? What do I think success looks like? And be optimistic, right? Don't say that things like, oh, success means that next week I will, do this. I mean, like, what is this business going to be in 5 years? What do I want it to be? Where do I want to go? And then understand sort of what will it take for me to get there? What kind of help do I need? What do I have to do myself? Do I need other people's help? You almost always need other people's help. And things like that. And so plan yourself out and think about it and be optimistic. And because particularly kids your age, you're still at so much the early stages of your lives. You have so much time to do a lot of things, so you can dream very big, if that makes sense. Because you have the time to do it, and there will be people who will help you. So that's my kind of advice, general.
Mm-hmm. And also, do you think it's also like when you're young, that's a really good time to just jump into things and then fail, because then you're not like, a lot of the time when you're an adult, when you start a business, is because you want to have some financials. You want to get money so you can support yourself, and so then when you're a kid, since you don't need to worry about that, then that's a really good time to just try things, and maybe it doesn't really work out, but that's okay, and then just do that multiple times, so when you do have an idea where you're like, I'm really committed to this, I do want to see this success in 5 years, then you have all of those skills and all of that knowledge.
Oh, absolutely. And I think this is true even for adults. I generally encourage, people. So it's sort of a balance between experience and exploration, right? And it's, if you want to make sure you get the experience along the way. And experience for kids means, making sure your classes are okay, right? You're getting good grades, and you're learning all the fundamentals, because you will need those in the future. But at the same time, you don't have the pressures of, you don't have to support a mortgage, you know and a family and this and that. And that's the time when you can really explore a lot of ideas. So and also getting comfortable with failure is always a very good thing, because one thing that actually even adult entrepreneurs get told all the time by their mentors is that it's you only remember the successes. Everybody who's ever succeeded has failed many times. They've just conveniently forgotten about it because it doesn't matter, right? And so it's always good to really try out stuff and learn from your mistakes, because that's a skill that you need in life, is to try out stuff that doesn't work and go, oh, okay, that didn't work. I'm not going to get depressed about it, but I'm going to figure out what I shouldn't do the next time. So training your brain to think that way is a really good skill to learn as young as possible.
Yeah, I like that. What is a belief or a point of view that you hold that is not shared by most other people?
That's interesting. Well, I do think that many people are quite conservative, and I do, like to try out new things, which seems, I also have a tendency to try things that may not be necessarily obvious to people around me. And so, like, I can tell you, like, this teaching AI to kids, for example, I started this with my daughter when she was 9, teaching her AI. And I don't think back then I knew anybody else who was doing that. And so people would look at me funny going, huh? And I've even had like people say, well, I once had a lady, very nicely, she said, I told my husband, and my husband said, I can't learn AI. How can my son? Stuff like that. And so people look at you going, I'm an adult and I think that stuff is hard. So how are you teaching kids? And so part of it is that they kind of have to see. And so one of the things that I think I've found sometimes is that sometimes you can see things that maybe other people can't see, but you just sort of stick to them, and then later it comes around. And so forth. And so that's something that's definitely happened to me, and I've sort of learned how to, okay, you don't see it, that's fine, let's keep going, kind of thing. So
What do you think made you like that, where you kind of, even if maybe everyone else didn't see the value in it, or just practicality in it, what made you keep wanting keep doing it?
So I guess a couple of things. I mean, honestly, at the beginning, I didn't do it when I was younger. If somebody thought it was weird, I just stopped doing it. And then later someone else did and I felt bad. I could have done that, right? And then I went through a phase where I did it, but I fought a lot with the people who didn't agree with me. Right? And stuff like that. And then over time, I realized that the fighting was kind of a waste of time. So now I think I've sort of learned. So I went from people don't understand it, I'm not going to do it, to then I'm depressed because then somebody else does it, to okay, now I'm going to do it, but I'm still irritated that the people around me don't understand it, so I'm fighting with them, to I'm just much calmer now. And I don't necessarily argue about it. I just assume that if it works over time, people will be able to tell. So it's a sort of a bit of a transition. Now I would suggest other people don't have to go through that transition. I think I probably did it the hard way.
Yeah, I think that also just comes with building your self-confidence and also just being able to just um trust yourself and what you think is best. And then because then it's just also with if you're just confident and then you're able to do things on your own for a little bit, and if people see that it's working out and people see that you're actually able to start teaching kids artificial intelligence, then how are they supposed to question it? So
And I think maybe one thing that you brought up, which is really important, that it's really helpful to create proof points early. Because one thing I learned is that many people who disagree with you, it's not necessarily that they're opposed. It's that sometimes they just have no idea what you're talking about. And if you can show them something, then they suddenly realize it. Because sometimes, like for example, if I tell someone that I'm teaching kids AI, what they bring into their brains is some graduate school AI course with a lot of math, and they say there's no way that's happening, and they're right. There's no way that's happening, right? And then, but if you show them, oh no, this is what I actually did, they say, oh, I get it now. What you're talking about is entirely different from what I was disagreeing with, and stuff like that. And so sometimes being able to help people visualize, whether it's either with a presentation, with a simple demo, right, or with an actual example of of doing it, it really just, it's not so much that they change their minds, it's that they better understand what you were saying, and now they're more likely to have a genuine response to. They may still disagree, but at least now they know what you're talking about. So those kinds of things are really helpful. And even for kids who are starting businesses, this is part of the reason why it's really important to be able to express yourself, create as many examples, as many analogies as you can, to help people understand what it is that you're trying to say. Because if they have no reference point, so they may be thinking about something entirely different from what you're saying. So.
Especially since people, when you're first talking about something, then they're gonna immediately think about things that they've encountered in the past, because that's just the easiest place to just start thinking about something. So if you're doing something really new and revolutionary, then if people disagree with you, then kind of just to think, well, maybe they don't quite understand, because this is very different than what people would normally think when, like, Wequel School is the name. They think about school, and it's completely different than, like, pretty much everything that we're doing. And so yeah.
And actually, this is something that I also tell kids, which I think might be helpful to your students as well, is kind of remember that the responsibility of helping people understand is not with them, it's with you. Like if you're explaining an idea to someone and they don't get it, you should probably explain it better. Right? It's, so it's not so much that you can say whatever you want and they didn't understand, it's their fault. You have to work harder to make yourself understood. So that's, I think, something that, typically when kids present and things like that, this is really something to think about, is what is it you want your audience to understand, and are you doing your best to help them understand it with as little effort on their part as possible.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So this is the last question we have on the list. If you want to circle back to anything, then I'm happy to do that. How can people get a hold of you if they are interested in what you do?
Oh, absolutely. So there's two ways to get a hold of me. One is our website for AI Club. And what I can do is I'm going to put the URL on the Zoom chat here, and you can put it, the video however you'd like.
Mhm.
So I'm putting the URL. It's http://corp.aiclubworld.world. The other one is my email address, which I'm also putting on the Zoom chat, and you can also feel free to share.
I'll link them both in the description.
Exactly. That way it'll be just easier for them. They'd like to. Yeah, I'm happy to chat. I'm always chatting with parents and people who are interested in education and nonprofits and folks who are doing social good projects and things like that. So super happy to chat with anybody who's interested in generally, AI literacy and kids learning tech and AI and stuff like that.
Yeah, and I mean I think that's just really amazing what you're doing with the AI club, and I definitely think, I mean, just I don't know if you're invited to the We Cool School Slack group, but I will definitely invite you, and you can just like jump on there and start just introducing yourself and talking about what you're doing, because I think this is something that's really helpful and something that we should try to emphasize more, because it really is, AI is just shaping our future, and is shaping the future jobs as well, and that's what what the primary goal of education is, to make it so that when you do go out into the economy of the future, that you're able to find jobs. And so
Please do invite me to the Slack. I'd love to join it. Yeah.
yeah,
And
well, mhm.
I was just going to say thank you so much. This was such a pleasure to talk with you, and I really loved hearing your perspectives, about the future and kids and starting businesses and such.
I loved hearing your thoughts as well. Thank you so much for joining.
Much. Thank you.
Okay. Well, bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.